At my boyfriend's birthday dinner, his college friends laughed and said, "She's dumb because she's just a high school grad." My boyfriend Grant went to college and I did not. I finished high school and went straight into the trade because I already knew what I wanted. And by the time Grant hit his second year, I had built a small business installing and servicing security and camera systems for shops and offices. I did not bring it up much because Grant did not like it when I talked about work. He said his degree was going to matter and mine was a phase. It did not start as a company. It started with me in a borrowed van, running wire for a hardware store owner who paid me in cash and told 2 other owners about the girl who did it right the first time. Those 2 told 4 more. I learned the panels, the cameras, the door controllers, the codes, all of it. At night, off manuals and off my own mistakes. And I kept every invoice in a shoebox until the shoebox turned into a filing cabinet and the filing cabinet turned into an office. By the time Grant was halfway through his second year, I had a real client list, repeat contracts, and a wait list. And I did not tell him most of that because the one time I tried, he checked his phone in the middle of a sentence, and I decided some things were mine to keep. His friends met me for the first time at his birthday dinner, 6 of them, all in his program, and the loudest was Reed. Grant introduced me, and Reed asked where I went to school. I said I did not go. Reed smiled at Grant and said, "Oh, okay." Grant laughed and said, "Do not worry. She is just a high school grad. She does not follow this stuff." Everyone laughed. I let it go because it was his birthday. That was the mistake. After that night, Grant thought he had found something funny, and he did not let it drop. Anytime I gave an opinion, he would say, "That is cute." If I explained how something worked, he would say, "Where did you learn that, high school?" and laugh at his own joke. I told him it bothered me. He said I was too sensitive, that it was only a joke, that a real girlfriend could take a joke. Then his friends started doing it too. Reed would text him things, and Grant would show me jokes about the dumb girlfriend, grinning like I should love them. One night, Reed came over while I was at the dining table with my laptop open on a set of floor plans, and he leaned over my shoulder and said, "Coloring?" Grant almost fell off the couch laughing. I closed the laptop and said nothing. I kept thinking they would grow out of it. They did not. It got worse. Grant started introducing me to new people as his girlfriend who did not do the school thing. At a party, a guy asked what I did, and before I could answer, Grant said, "She does cameras or something. It pays the bills." Reed added, "Barely, right?" And they all laughed. The thing is, I was doing better than fine. I had 3 guys working for me by then, and I turned down more jobs than I took. But every time I tried to say a word about it, Grant waved his hand and said, Okay, you install doorbells, we get it." He would not let me finish a sentence. His friends all had big plans, jobs they were going to land, money they were going to make, and every time they talked about it, Grant looked at me and said, "See, this is what school is for." Reed was the worst. Reed was graduating that spring, and he would not stop talking about the offers coming his way. He said he was going to clear 6 figures right out of school. He said it at every dinner. He said, "Some of us have a future," and he looked right at me when he said it. Grant nodded along. I stayed quiet, and every time I stayed quiet, they took it as proof they were right. What none of them knew was that during those same dinners, my phone was going off under the table with real numbers on it. A retail chain wanted their 4 locations wired the same month Reed was telling the table he would be turning down offers. A property manager wanted every unit in a building on a single system. I read those messages in the bathroom and came back to the table and smiled while Grant explained to a guy across from us that I did installs. And I could have put my quarter on the table next to Reed's imaginary salary and ended the whole thing in one sentence. I did not, because I had learned that the more you tell people like that, the more they find ways to make it small. So I let them talk. I let Reed describe the corner office he was going to have. I let Grant say for the 100th time, "See, this is what school is for." Then spring came and Reed graduated. All summer he did not get a single offer. The big firms never called back. He went quiet about his future. Grant still made his high school jokes at me, but Reed stopped joining in because Reed had nothing to brag about anymore. In August, my office manager, Sibel, emailed me that we had a strong applicant for the install and service lead position and wanted me to run the final interview. I opened the resume, and it was Reed. Same Reed. He had applied to my company without knowing it was mine. Because my name is not on the sign, my business name is, I did not tell Grant. I let it come. Reed walked into the interview in a suit that was a size too big, and his face fell the second he saw me at the head of the table. He stopped in the doorway with his folder of extra resumes against his chest and looked at Sibel, then at me, then at the nameplate on the wall behind me that has my business name on it and not my name, and I watched him do the math and get an answer he did not like. He said, "Wait, you work here?" I said, "I own it." He just sat there. I let him sit. I opened his folder, slid one copy of his resume out, and set it flat on the table between us, and he watched that piece of paper like it might get up and testify. It was all there in his own words, printed and stapled. The degree, the honors line, the objective statement at the top that said he was seeking a position with strong compensation and room to grow. I read the objective out loud, slowly. I said, "It says you want a role with growth and good pay." He nodded. I said, "The lead I am hiring makes more than the 6 figures you kept talking about at dinner." He said, "You are serious?" I said, "This person reports to me every day. Is that a problem?" He said, "No problem," and he was sweating through the shirt. I asked him one more thing. I asked if he thought a high school grad could teach him the job. He knew what I meant. He said, "I was out of line before. That was mostly Grant." I told him that was interesting, because Grant was not the one leaning over my shoulder saying coloring. Reed was. I did not hire him. I told him he was not a fit, and I walked him to the door myself, past the desks where my crews were working, past the nameplate on the wall, and he did not say another word the whole way. At the door he stopped like he wanted to explain something, then thought better of it and stepped out into the lot. I watched him get smaller in the glass, and I felt nothing I had to apologize for. That night, Grant asked how my day was. I told him I interviewed Reed. He laughed and said, "Reed, for what? Are you hiring at the doorbell place?" I said, "The doorbell place has 12 people now. now, and I own it, and I turned your friend down today because he could not stop laughing about my education. Grant stopped smiling. He said, you own it? I said I had owned it the whole time he was calling me a high school grad. He said, why did you never say anything? I said, you never let me finish a sentence. He tried to fix it fast, and for 2 days he was a different man. He came home with food from my favorite place and sat across from me and asked how work was, and I almost choked because in 2 years he had never asked once. He asked how many employees I had. He asked about my biggest contracts, what I billed, who my clients were, how I got the first one, what the margins looked like. He nodded at the answers and said, that is real. And I did not know that about the industry. And he asked follow-up questions like a man who had been paying attention the whole time. I am not going to lie. It felt good. For the first time, I was sitting across from someone who wanted to hear me talk, and I let myself lean into it, telling him the whole story of the first big job, the borrowed van, the shoebox of invoices. He smiled and said, that is smart. I thought maybe finding out the truth was the wake-up call he needed. I wanted that to be true so badly that I did not notice, until later, that he never once asked whether any of it had been hard, or whether I was tired, or whether I was proud. He only asked the questions that had numbers for answers. I let myself hope. Then on Thursday, he said we should go to dinner that weekend with Reed and the guys to clear the air, that he had told them he was wrong and everyone should move past it. Part of me did not want to be near any of them, but part of me wanted to see Grant make it right in front of the same people who watched him tear me down. So I went. Reed was already there when we sat down and he could barely look at me. Before the food came, Grant stood up and raised his glass and said, most of you know my girlfriend does the security and camera thing. What you probably do not know is that she owns the whole company, 12 employees. She makes more than everyone at this table. He was beaming. Then he said, I always knew she was going to blow up. The others raised their glasses. Grant sat back down, put his arm around me, and kept going. And that is when I heard it. We have been growing it for a while now. We just hired our 12th person. We are looking at expanding. We. In 2 years, he had never once said we about my work. It was her little thing, or the doorbell place. Now suddenly it was we. He was not proud of me. He was claiming me. He was sitting in front of the same people who watched him mock me, and rewriting the whole story into one where he was the boyfriend who always believed. I smiled through the meal and said nothing, because I wanted to see the full shape of it, and I was seeing it. In the car after, I said, you said we a lot tonight. He smiled and said, because we are a team. I said, you called it a doorbell place last week. His smile dropped and he said he was trying here, and his voice went soft, and I almost let it be enough, but I had a test in mind. I stopped talking about work completely. He asked how my day was, and I said, fine, nothing special. And he said, cool, and turned on the TV. I waited to see if the man who toasted my company would bring up my work on his own. Monday I came home from a full day, closed a warehouse contract, dealt with a scheduling problem across 2 crews, and said none of it. He asked how my day was, and I gave him nothing, and he took it. Tuesday I did the same, and we talked about a show and whether we needed to stop at the store. And my whole afternoon, the part of my life that had 12 people in it, stayed folded up in my pocket. Wednesday, nothing from him. Thursday, nothing. He did not ask about the warehouse. He did not ask if I was stressed, or if the crews were short, or if anything had gone right. Friday came, and he had not asked once, because he had never wanted the answers. He wanted material. He collected facts about my company to use at dinners, and the second I stopped feeding him, he had nothing to ask. The next Monday, Sibel closed my office door and said Reed had called twice, asking if there was anything at all, saying he would take a junior role, asking if I would reconsider. I told her there was nothing available. I knew what came next. That evening, I was wiping down the counter after dinner when Grant leaned against the wall with his arms crossed and said Reed told him I turned him down again. He said, why